Hi there. Just want to put together a short video here talking about engaging families or how, as educators, we can make sure that we get parents and guardians on our side. And we need them to be partners in our education. So I just have a couple ideas that we can think about today for considering your communication choices as a classroom teacher. And we all know about kind of the old school calendars and newsletters. And I still think there's a place for that because a lot of parent feedback is they'll come back to you and say, it's so great to have that quick visual reminder up on the fridge. It's just that organization piece. We know how busy families are. And of course, with newsletters on top of that, you can sort of highlight some of your big thinking ideas for the month and give parents a sneak peek into what your expectations are and what some of the big curriculum pieces are and how they can help at home. And even if there's challenges built into what those calendars and newsletters are saying, so that they're prompting their kids and it's hopefully paralleling what conversations are happening in the classroom. That can be really helpful. But sometimes these never get pulled out of the zipper bags and don't get put up in the fridge. So it is kind of a passive way to communicate. And while it's great for organization, maybe there's some other things we can do to get parents more engaged. Something to think about now, class websites. Truly, it's never been easier to make a Google site. And I'm actually just going to escape out of the presentation here for a minute and take you just behind the scenes of a Google site I made. So this was just a project we're doing in grade 3 one year. So it wasn't my classroom website per se. But if I go back into what I see in my editing mode, it's really quite fantastic. So you can add all these different sort of pages to the menu. When we go over here to the right-hand side, you see this is where we can insert layouts and pictures and even image carousels and all sorts of things for sharing good stuff from your classroom. But when we click on the pages section, I can actually add a new page into my website on the fly. And when I then browse to that new page, I can change its images and I can go back to the insert piece and drag over really quick layout. And here I'm prompted to upload pictures from Google Drive or the computer or whatever you have. So what a great way to share some student work, some expectations, some rubrics, just giving parents an eye into the classroom, which of course every parent loves. Let's see, what else can we do? So we have the classroom website, and we can also look at perhaps a classroom blog. And this is something that's really cool, especially if you can co-create it with students. Lots of different places out there to consider hosting your blog, whether you're just doing it as a teacher or you want the students to join in with some of that writing. So an example here, it ends up looking a bit like a website. So blogs can have a table of contents, and it's just great to just remember that while photos are great and you want to give parents an eye into the classroom, really we want them to be supporting what we're doing. So sharing prompts for parents and families at home, sharing what your expectations are, what your rubrics are looking like. That'll help you in the long run too, because all of your big assessment pieces have been clearly communicated along the way. So something to think about. Also, it's a great place to put some helpful links, especially for those kids that might need some extra supports in the evenings. Okay, just a reminder too, if you're able to get kids to create the content, and especially in some of the older grades, you can have a blogger of the week, and that's the post that's put up. And perhaps those students are summarizing some of the big exciting things that were happening with learning that week. What a cool way to have parents looking forward to seeing what the next blog entry might be. Okay. Email, of course, is something that you can consider. It's one of those back and forth discourse tools. So as long as you're open to having responses digitally, you're able to manage that and stay on top of that. That is an option that a lot of parents might like, because on the fly is something they can easily do on their phone. And I know, at least in my school board, there's certain apps that have been pulled back in terms of privacy and things like that. And Remind has been one of them. And that was an app that a lot of parents liked because you could almost send text messages out with quick updates and things like that. So I know teachers in my board have to look at something that's more based in what the board systems are. So email is something that's a bit safer and has some of that same functionality. So that's an option as well. Of course, portfolio apps and communication apps are pretty fantastic. The conversation, though, is depending on where you're working and what you're actually able to use. And for instance, on my board, the top three there, Seesaw and Class Dojo and FreshGrade, these were options used for a long time by a lot of teachers, but we're now kind of looking a bit more into the privacy concerns with those and are being told not to use them in our classes. Brightspace by D2L is something that our board has jumped on. So we do have the blessing to move forward and use Brightspace as a way to share images, have students upload their own content, and it ends up being a bit of a portfolio tool for the students, as well as a way as a teacher for you to share out the learning every day and have some of those communication, those back and forth communication opportunities are all kind of built into one tool. So kind of dig in to see what your board says about different portfolio tools. It can be overwhelming at times, so it's something that you need to judge for yourself and say, is this a tool that works for me? Is this a make work project? Is there value added in it? Are students part of doing the curating of what's going into those portfolios? Because that's really where the learning comes, and you want that student voice and that student conversation at home. Not just necessarily the teacher always putting things on and then students saying, oh, I didn't see that. And so there's a bit of a disconnect there sometimes. So really kind of wrap your head around whether a one-stop shop like a portfolio app might work for you as well as a way to, I guess, engage parents with communication. A little bit of the two-way dialogue opens up there, but certainly an eye into the classroom and especially what your learning expectations are. Okay, just something to be thinking about as well. Whenever you're using email or something like a portfolio app, make sure that you make it very clear what your office hours are. I know as teachers, there's really no such thing as office hours, but just kind of clearly communicate. We'll be checking emails until 8 p.m. or 5 p.m., whatever that is, just so you're able to turn it off and not worry about missing a message at night. Just making sure that those parameters are really clear for everyone. Okay. All right, so a lot of the things I just talked about were ways to keep parents informed. Here's what's happening. Here's some pictures. Here's what we're learning. And I guess I wonder if there's options that let us actually engage the parents, pull them in and have some fun expectations for them to be part of the learning as well. So how do we get parents on side, on board, loving what you're doing in the classroom, feeling that you're approachable as a teacher, and seeing that you have the best interests of their kids in mind? I sometimes might need more than a calendar to do that. So here's some options to consider. And again, it's just choosing what works for you. And it's all supposed to be fun and positive. And that's the whole idea of sharing what's happening in your classroom, because you're putting so much energy into what's happening in your space for those 6.5 hours. Just making sure that parents kind of see that, like, you're putting a lot of effort into it. And we hope that parents are coming along for the ride and supporting what's happening in the room. So we want that parent inclusion. Face-to-face, honestly, is just, it's underrated sometimes. And a few things I've done in the past that I found have really helped set up the year for me with really positive parent relationships early on. Getting that really positive social currency from parents has been pulling them in to something like a project lunch. And so, for instance, one year I wanted to do a number of field trips and try Twitter in the classroom and do some new things in a grade 3 class. And I thought, instead of answering 101 questions with phone calls and things like that, I'm going to invite them to come to my room after school one day for half an hour. And I had like a little slideshow, and they got to see my excitement about why I wanted to use Twitter and why I want them to sign off on these media permission forms and how it's a safe kind of space. And they got to see my energy, and they got to be there with the kids in the classroom. And you end up with parents kind of excited about what's going on. They feel like maybe something different's happening. And they know that you have a lot of energy put in towards making something really fun for your kids happen. So I found when I've done something like that, you're advertising saying, hey, please come in. Maybe it's after the meet the teacher night for stay for an extra half hour or a different evening right after school sometime in September. they're able to see what you're all about and see that you're approachable. And you want them to see your energy, because then, when you have conversations later in the year, they remember that experience with you and how, you've invited them into your space, and they know you're taking your personal time as well to do some things that are above and beyond for their kids. So if you have some sort of like project idea, or you just want to say, hey, I want to kind of give you guys a deep dive into what a day in the life is in the classroom here, throw together like a little miniature open house of your own. So I found that while it's a lot of work in September for that night, it really paid off in the long run, with a lot of parent buy-in throughout the rest of the year. Something similar when you're thinking about Meet the Teacher night, what can that look like? And obviously, like, kids like to show off their space, but sometimes you don't really get a sense to connect with parents in a certain way. I would really recommend setting up some different like learning stations. Something like Cuisinart rods. That's one of those math tools where parents are still scratching their heads. So put together some math questions. So kids are using those math tools with their parents in your room, and they're able to ask those questions right then and there in September. And so when kids talk about using these tools later in the year, parents have had their hands on them. Have a digital survey or a collaborative app up on the projector. I've often done like a Padlet where there's just a survey question and the parents get to use an iPad to answer the question. That's just kind of neat, because in my classroom, I'm expecting my own students to use digital surveys and use Padlet for different sorts of things. So it's great for parents to see some of the tech that the kids are using. So when they see it again coming up in the future, it's something that's familiar and they get it. Wonder jar activities. I often have kids bring in a mason jar full of just items that kind of give a sneak peek into their identity a little bit. And other kids, they're not able to answer questions about it. Other kids have to do an observation and inference and a wondering. So I see this, so I think you might like this, and I wonder if. And it's very cool to see the parents go around and take a look at other kids' wonder jars on Meet the Teacher night as well, because it just has them asking questions or thinking about questions. And it's a lot of fun for the kids. So it's neat playing the parents that way too. And I do a lot of work with iPads in my classroom, and kids do selfies every day just to kind of touch in with their emotional, where they're sitting. So they take an emotional selfie, check-in every day, but I have them do like a parent selfie that night too. And parents will see that the kids would like, where are those pictures going? How are they organizing the folders on the iPad? How are they sharing the technology? And then later, those parent selfies might be something that kids can use in their art, or when they're writing a letter to their parents, and they have that image that might be handy later in the year. So just think about some things you can have parents doing with their kids in the classroom. That's a lot of fun. Maybe a little scavenger hunt, something like that as well. And that way, you're just walking around facilitating. You're seeing them having fun. They see that it's a neat space, instead of sometimes they're nervous to meet the teacher, or might have some of those barriers there themselves from their own school experiences. So I always found that worth the time as well. I also like to do, like, later in the year, big celebration night. So if we're ending a big unit, whether you're doing like like lights off flashlight tours for your ancient civilizations, unit, or we did a lot of community work with seniors, and we wrote some songs. So we asked to use this big community space and invited all the parents and the seniors and the mayor to come, and had a really big audience there. And what was really special about that was that it gave the kids an authentic audience to when they were doing their work throughout the unit. They knew that they were showcasing it in a large way. So that really got a lot of buy-in from the kids, but it got a lot of buy-in from the parents as well, especially when they saw the mayor showing up and the principal of the school, and all these community members kind of applauding and being excited to see what the kids are learning and sharing, and just that sense of pride that you saw on the parents' faces. So some of those bigger face-to-face activities, I find, are worth the extra time and effort. To be quite honest, I know it is a workload piece, but even if it's just a smaller version of that, I think it just opens up a lot of communication back and forth that way, in a positive way. Something to think about too, inviting parents to contribute to classroom learning. So what I mean about that is use parents as a data source. That we're kind of spiraling in data management as we can throughout the year. And with simple things like Google Forms, we can send a Google form home to all parents and ask them a question. And I'm just kind of going to get quickly out of the presentation here again. So this was just like a sample form. So we create the form together as a class, or students could even create it. And when we get the responses the next day, we get to analyze these pre-made pie charts and bar charts about what's happening, right? We get that feedback. And at least some of the younger students, like primary, junior, they're pretty excited to see that their parents, their input was part of what was happening in the next day's math class. So rather than like traditional homework where kids are going home and doing like math or a worksheet or something, a worksheet or something like that, you can send home a message to parents saying, hey, quick survey question. What do you think about this? And perhaps it's a geometry question or a quick, which one would you rather do? Like some sort of math question. And that can help launch what you're doing for your math talk the next day. So that's pretty cool. And of course, when you're here as well, you get to click on this little green button when you're in forms, and that brings you to the actual data in a spreadsheet. And it's just great practice for kids to see data and make conclusions and be in the practice of doing that regularly. And then it also helps for when they're creating their own surveys later. So just a really simple way for parents to kind of be engaged, and they know that their feedback is being used real time in the classroom, and technology is kind of the way that they can make that happen. So hopefully there's some good conversation happening at the dinner table afterwards. That happens. Let's see here. We're going to load. Come on, computer, you can do it. So forms is a way to access. Flipgrid is something that's gained a lot of traction in the last few years. It's the video vlogging site where basically it's just so easy to add a video, and you create this portal and all the videos come up in a grid and you can watch everyone else's responses. So, I mean, we need to be careful in how we're doing this, because we'll have a lot of kids' faces, like kids' videos in here as well. But if kids are logging into their own accounts at home, they could, do a survey question with mom and dad, or we could even set up a different Flipgrid account. And there's lots of YouTube videos on how to do this, and send a password protected Flipgrid question to parents. And then kids will be able to check those out too and see what the parents are thinking about certain topics and big questions that you're asking in the classroom. So kind of neat. Also, the use of hyperdocs, which really is just making a Google Doc with links. So this is an example of a math one where instead of sending home math homework, you can email out this hyperdoc, and you might say, hey, if you do 4 activities over the next 2 weeks, perhaps, like some sort of like promotion in your class where you want kids to kind of engage in those math activities with parents, but it's not that traditional, you need to do this homework every night kind of piece. Just kind of understanding as well that parents are super busy, and sometimes kids have those activities where they can't do homework every night, but this is something fun where they can choose a few activities per week, and it's still a good use of everyone's time. And of course, whenever you click on a word and kind of right click or double tap and open up, you can make anything a link, and you can link it to a website, a YouTube video. You can even link it to other docs and things and forms that you've made. You can get those link details for when you create your Google Forms or through Microsoft, wherever you're doing it, and put it onto this document. And it's kind of like a one-stop shop for a whole bunch of things. I could imagine this being used really well instead of a reading log and having just a selection of different reading feedback or reader response activities that they're using less pencil paper. Perhaps it kind of replaces that written reading log every night where parents are filling out books with their kids. And as a parent myself, sometimes it gets tired, right? So I wonder where's this going? It sometimes loses its engagement factor after it's been months of that same reading log coming home. So something like this might be a neat way to keep parents on their toes a little bit. So yeah, a lot of parent goodwill, I think, as well. Okay, let's see. I could put this as hashtag parents can too. Something to think about if you are a tech savvy classroom and kids are on Chromebooks and kids are using Google Suite or Microsoft 360, or they're on iPads and they're airdropping here and there, parents might not know exactly what that means. And whenever I've had visiting nights where kids have shown off their work, the parents are flabbergasted at what those kids can do with devices, because they just simply don't use their devices the same way. So something that's really cool too is to consider a student ed camp of some sort. So maybe they're running a tech camp for the parents, and this happens during an afternoon or a time that works for everyone. And your students can kind of have little group sessions and teach parents how to use some of the different, like your five biggest go-to apps, or here's how they set up their Google Drive folders. And one session might be creating a form. Whatever it's happening in your classroom regularly, it's cool to have parents be the learners, and what a great opportunity for your students to kind of have that teacher role and really give that mastery and knowing that skill set and building, again, that confidence for an authentic audience. And again, like, it's just that goodwill from parents because they're coming in, they're seeing their kids be leaders, they're seeing them do it collaboratively, all those great things we're trying to grow in our classrooms. What a great way to show off students, right? Also thinking about student-led conferences, perhaps, instead of interviews. A great thing I've heard about with this is considering parents come in a certain time, a couple of groups of parents at a time. There's 5 stations. One of the stations is with you. The other 4 are kids showing off some of their work. So one might be an art station, and they're talking about the portfolio, and another station is a math task, and they're going to do a task with the parent and lead them through a math talk. It just gives the parents an idea of what it feels like to do some of the work in the classroom. So by the time they come to you, you can really talk about expectations and how things are going. And it's sometimes breaks down that sometimes there's tension, right? When parents come in and they're hesitant to want to bring something up. You want to be kind of vulnerable to that and open, but creating a space where kids are doing most of the talking, and no question is a stupid question. So sometimes student-led conferences, because the kids are in the room, really help make those conversations a bit better. And then you can help the students word it in their words through their parents. So the 3 of you together can make a plan. And I think that's a great idea. Also for getting that engagement piece when you're all there at the table together. Okay. And talking about assessment, again, when kids are talking about their learning, it's recognizing student voice. We talk about that so much. It's so important that students are vocalizing their goals and what their challenges are, and taking ownership of what they need to do every day, and letting their parents know that, like, they are the lead learner in the classroom for themselves, and as a teacher, you're there to guide them and prompt them as needed. But really, that student owns that assessment piece and how they get better. Something to think about too that I found has been great for parents is using the single point rubric idea, where instead of having a level 1, 2, 3, 4, you just show your level 3 in the middle. And if a student goes through, and these would all be co-created, so the students know what each of these areas mean. They have this rubric with them while they're doing their different tasks. And if they think they've got level 3 in that specific expectation, they check it off. And if they think they exceeded expectations on one of these criteria, they put a check mark over here, and they know then on the back they'd have to flip it over and write down their proof as to how they really exceeded what the expectation was. And if they feel that something was not really strong, like perhaps they're working on their organization, they might put a check mark over here for organization in the level 2 column. And that would then turn into their goal. So when they write at the bottom what their goal is to work forward on next year, they're going to use that language. I then go over with my green highlighter and highlight where I think all the kids are. I never really put a level on the rubric, but you can see just by averaging out where all the green highlighters are, where kids are sitting. But what it does do is open up a better conversation about what's that goal that kid needs to work on, and can they verbalize it themselves? So I put these rubrics on top of anything that goes home. And I usually have like a big scrapbook, and the rubric will be on the front, the task will be underneath. It goes home every 2 or 3 weeks. Parents sign off and bring those reading logs back, or those assessment logs back. So I know that they've seen it. But because it's in kid language and kids are writing their own goals, and I'm just writing in some feedback, and I'm highlighting where they're at, and we're setting goals together, it really made for very few phone calls and very few questions at interview time, because it's so crystal clear that they are part of the conversation, and the expectations are right there for them to see. So it keeps it really expectation focused, and keeps a lot of the emotion out of evaluation, right? It's all very clear. So I think this approach and pulling student voice into assessment really, really helped with a relationship with parents where it was focused on expectations, and that was well worth the time, and awesome learning for kids. Like, it's so great that the kids are part of that assessment conversation. Okay. So just kind of remember to invite the parent perspective as much as you can throughout the year. Remind them that all learners have goals. So even those kids that are doing fantastic things, again, they are in charge of saying, here's where I need to go next. So when parents come in, you can kind of say, well, what is their goal? We know they're at this certain level, but we're pushing. And so what's this next piece for them, right? And it keeps the learning forward, keeps it focused on expectations all the time. And just kind of have fun. And if I had one more piece of advice to give, is just remembering that, like, when we go to school as teachers, we see those kids as students. When parents send their kids to school, they see them as their children, not as students. So we have very different perspectives on those little beings that hang out in our rooms. So just being mindful of that as much as possible. If we're able to keep sometimes, like, the emotions out of that piece. And it's hard being a parent, and it's hard hearing feedback about kids. But the more it comes from their own kids' experience, and the kids are kind of driving that, and you seem very open as a teacher, it makes those conversations much easier, I think. Anyways, that was a lot of ideas. Find one that just fits well for you, and just don't forget to have fun. Teaching is a great job. Enjoy it. And good luck. Thank you.